Rain World Downpour is set to release in 3 days, and I've been given the opportunity to talk to all of you about it ahead of time. I've written this review in a way that keeps spoiler-related content separate, with plenty of warnings. With that said, I want to give full disclosure that while Acapara Games provided me with this early access code, something I'm very grateful for, every opinion expressed in this video is my own. Right, so when I watch a review, I want to know right up front what the verdict is. No jerking me around. The verdict is that I love it. At the time of writing this, the price hadn't even been announced. Don't care, it's worth the money. The price has been announced since then, however, and it's $15 US, which is about 14 euros or 12.5 pounds. You should get it as soon as it is available on the 19th because it is a fantastic expansion, absolutely brimming with content. We'll dive into why I so firmly believe this soon, but first, let's get our toes wet with the new options menu. We're going to take a look at the updates to the base game. Now, I've disabled the DLC for a moment to highlight these changes. They're coming regardless of if you buy the DLC or not. You can see we have a new option for backgrounds, which lets you select the menu and submenu backgrounds from a nice selection of art you've unlocked through regular gameplay. We also have this new checkbox over here for speedrun validation. I think this is really cool. Developers embracing the speedrunning community is something I always love to see. This says it will display information on loading screens to verify the validity of speedruns. Pretty neat. Over here, we have an analog sensitivity slider, FPS limiter, and video quality options, low, medium, and high. As someone who plays with a controller, I really appreciate this sensitivity addition. The vibration checkbox up here is also new. Finally, we have some new language options: Japanese, Korean, Russian, and Chinese. Good stuff. Next up, the remix menu. These remix options are pretty cool. The first thing you'll notice is that this is designed to look like the old mod list. It even mentions right here, enabled region mods. This is going to make managing mods so much easier going forward. We'll check out the Rain World remix options. Here we have some presets. They're pretty different from each other. We have the remix option, classic, and relaxed, and clicking on relaxed pops up this box warning you that it is not the intended experience from the developers. I think this is great. Accessibility options are always good, and it still says, "We hear you, and while this may not be how we intended you to play it, we would rather you experience it than not at all." Doesn't talk down to you, and that's nice. Looking at the differences between remix and classic, obviously classic is going to be what you're used to, and the more detailed settings we're about to explore even have a checkbox for vanilla exploits, presumably primarily for speedrunners. Another thumbs up. As for remix, we'll pop over to the general tab here and look at what it changes. Remix mode turns on. Loading screen tips. I've seen these, and while I'll personally turn them off, I think they're a welcome addition. Rain timer tick-tock, adding a ticking sound when viewing the UI clock. Fast map reveal, pretty self-explanatory, looking at the map loads it faster. Vulnerable jellyfish, this is an interesting one. You can't spear jellyfish in the vanilla game. I've never even realized this. Now you can if you want to. Passage progress without survivor. This is a big one. Normally you have to achieve the survivor passage before you can unlock any others. Now you don't have to. Alpha reds, a mean option. Red lizards now have a tongue and can snap spears in half with their bite. Arena creatures cannot flee. This prevents creatures from fleeing into dens when they're injured in arena mode. Vanilla exploits is unchecked. And lastly, wall pouncing is turned on. I'm not 100% sure what this is yet. I haven't messed around with it too much, but cool. Over here on the assists tab, we have some accessibility options. These are going to make it easier for you to play the game. We have key items on passage. I like this one. This one brings everything in your shelter with you when you use a passage. Scavenger kill squad leniency. This gives you a grace period, protecting you from kill squad attacks at the beginning of a new cycle or upon entering a new region. No hunter batfly auto grabbing. Does what it says on the tin. Nice change. They aren't worth very much food, so it helps out. No stealing hunter back spear. This prevents scavengers from stealing the spear off the hunter's back. I've never actually seen this happen, so I didn't know it was a mechanic. Monk Extended Breath lets the monk breathe underwater longer, not sure by how much. Wiggle Out of Grasps is a nice one. It gives you the opportunity to maybe wiggle out of something's grasp if you're rapidly wiggling the movement buttons. And as a side note, a couple inclusions that deserve an honorable mention are Quieter Gates and Shelters and Reduced Screen Shake. I know many people quite sensitive to sounds who would really appreciate seeing this type of thing in more games. If we move up to Story Mode, you'll see we now have a little checkbox for custom colors. Activating this checkbox brings up some sliders for body and eye color. And then the last vanilla change that I'm aware of is this little menu that now appears upon hibernation. Took me a while to figure out exactly what it was, but it's displaying sandbox and arena unlocks for each region. This is incredibly helpful, especially with all the new unlockables. Love it. I'll catch back up with you after I've enabled the DLC again. Now I'm back, having enabled the DLC through the remix menu here, and it's worth pointing out that the More Slugcats expansion also has some options. Now, we have some helpful assist options, which I won't click on as the text does hint at new mechanics, and a cheat menu, which will allow you to unlock the campaigns, sandbox items, challenges, and much, much more. These are hidden behind several confirmations, so you can unlock sandbox items without spoiling yourself on more serious endgame unlocks. A nice decision. Back to the main menu, and you'll notice right away we have a few new menu options and a rockin' new background. The first thing we'll look at is the collection. Again, I've been careful to layer these spoilers in a very precise way. I will warn you before I show you something that you'd wish you'd seen yourself first. All this collection menu is, despite being empty at the moment, is a place for you to come and read the lore you can get from Pearls. It even has separate tabs for lore you may receive from different places. I'm not activating any of these in the interest of spoiler guarding, but it's very nice. Gone are the days of screenshotting the lore. If you're familiar with the base game and good at counting, you may also notice that there's heaps more of it now too. Very exciting. Next up, we have some new modes under the Arena option. Aside from some new sandbox and arena stage unlocks, of which there's quite the handful, this section is the same as before. However, if we click this arrow up here, we have a couple of new tabs. The first of these is the Challenges tab. These challenges are separated by character and color-coded. Some of them require beating the game as that specific character to unlock, while these at the bottom require completing a total number of challenges to unlock, with one final challenge unlocked by completing all the others. I'm really happy about this addition. It reminds me of the challenges in Pikmin 2, and I loved playing those as a kid. There's just something fun about the drop-in nature of it. These challenges are pretty varied too. Some are, sure, kill all the creatures, befriend a creature, gain a certain number of points, but they become more interesting as you unlock more of them. We're just still in that spoiler-sensitive part of the review. The second tab is the Safari tab. Much like the sandbox unlocks, we don't start with any of these. They're also scattered around the single-player campaign for us to hunt down. That said, I'll share some footage of me playing this in the opening areas of the base game. What this mode offers is the ability to passively observe the different ecosystems, hence Safari, with the big draw being the fact that you can control creatures. It's interesting, and I can see myself having a lot of fun with it once I get the hang of it, especially with some of the new regions we'll unlock later. But I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity that there's no co-op mode. I think the idea of controlling different creatures with your friend and seeing how they stack up would be cool. Of course, developers have limited time, and I'm sure that's a pretty tall order, especially the way the camera works in this mode. Overall, I think you'll have fun here, especially if, like me, this is a world you just can't get enough of. Back to the main menu, we have another big mode, Expedition mode. The first thing that caught my eye when I entered this screen was the Jukebox tab. There are 124 tracks to unlock. We'll look at how to unlock these later. Anyway, back to the Expedition menu, you'll see that we only have 2 Slugcats to choose from starting out. If you've beaten the game as either the Monk or Survivor, you may also have the Hunter available. In order to unlock the new characters in this mode, you'll have to beat their campaigns in the Story mode. There's also a set of detailed instructions for this mode up here under the Manual button, if you want to see all this mode has to offer. But to keep it brief, here's the gist. You roll up a set of randomized challenges, start in a random location, and you win once you complete the challenges. Over here on the left, you'll also notice a co-op button. This is where we'll get our first look at the new multiplayer options. I'll go into what these are during the multiplayer section, but as you can see, it's a pretty big improvement over the old Jolly Co-op mod. If we select a Slugcat and click New Expedition, we're taken to a challenges screen, not to be confused with the one we saw earlier. On this screen, we have a difficulty slider, which affects the difficulty of the challenges generated when we press this little dice button down here. We can also hide some of the challenges so they don't appear until we start the expedition. Down here we can see how many points those challenges are worth and how the points will affect our level, the benefits of which we can explore here on the Configure Perks and Burdens tab. Nothing unlocked yet, but there are various benefits and disadvantages that you can use to augment your expedition. Back to the Expedition Challenges tab, if we click this little arrow labeled Progression in the top right, we can see a massive list of quests. This is how we go about unlocking the music for the jukebox. Up here we have some missions. These are like expeditions but with specific preset challenges. For example, Nature's Friend here requires us to earn the Saint, the Friend, and the Chieftain passages. And once we finish it, it will complete the corresponding quest down on the quest board. In this case, quest number 39. These are going to be a lot of fun. It's going to add tremendous longevity to this game. And finally, we arrive at Story Mode. We're about to get into our first set of spoilers as I talk about the different Slugcats and how they play. I'm just about to start showing actual gameplay too, though for now I'll limit this to the outskirts as I did for Safari Mode. Again, Outskirts is the starting region of the base game's campaigns, so no spoilers there in regards to regions, even for a totally new player. Now, there are two things worth mentioning at this time. The first is that these campaigns have an unlock progression. They're unlocked in a specific order. The Gourmand and Artificer are unlocked alongside the Hunter by completing the Monk or Survivor campaigns. The Rivulet and Spearmaster by completing the Gourmand, Artificer, or Hunter campaigns. And finally, Saint by completing both Rivulet and Spearmaster. You won't be able to use these Slugcats in Expedition mode until you've completed their campaign. The second is that the co-op button only appears on the 3 base game campaigns, Monk, Survivor, and Hunter. The reason for this is that each of the 5 new campaigns are specifically tailored to the new Slugcats. They're very different from both the base campaigns and each other, taking place at unique times in the game's world. I will say, I personally find the lack of co-op on these campaigns to also be a bit of a missed opportunity. I'm not sure why they couldn't handle the issue by locking both players to the campaign's corresponding Slugcat. I'm sure there's probably some technical reason for this, and I suspect I know what it may be, but if there isn't, I'd say we're probably going to see this as a mod anyway, so no worries there if you're on PC. Now, with all that said, we're going to start taking a look at these Slugcats in their unlock order. We're going to come down here and start with the Gourmand. I didn't think I'd like the Gourmand very much, admittedly. It just didn't seem to fit my playstyle. Color me surprised that I actually like playing this Slugcat. The gimmick, as I'm sure you can guess, is that it's chunky. Really though, there's much more to it than that. This Slugcat is also smart enough to combine items or food. Again, a mechanic I didn't expect much from, but was proven wrong when it actually came to utility. Aside from the fact that it's immediately useful for campaign-related reasons, it's also just fun to do. Debating whether or not to keep an item in your hand because you may stumble upon the one you need later is an interesting addition to the already important decision of what to bring with you. Sometimes you don't need to go anywhere to find what you need though, because there's actually a bunch of junk rattling around in this gut. Holding grab with nothing in your hands will allow you to spit up a random item, though this does come at the cost of 1 food pip. Earlier on in my playthrough, I managed to get stuck in a room. This Slugcat isn't exactly dexterous, and I couldn't reach the pole I needed to climb out. After struggling for a bit, I remembered this mechanic and started hawking up some garbage. Lo and behold, I spit up a mushroom, which I was able to immediately eat, and make the jump. I fell again shortly afterward, crushing some spiders. That's another thing about this Slugcat, it's heavy. Another time on my first run, I clumsily fell off a pole right onto a scavenger's head with a crunch. Now I had a dead scavenger under me and 2 coming at me with spears. That weight will be useful, but you'll have to be careful about how you throw it around. The Gourmand also feels stronger. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I was able to drag heavier things than I've been able to with the Survivor or Monk, so I believe it's at least as strong as the Hunter. This strength comes at a cost though. The Gourmand has a massive hunger bar, and doing too much physically taxing activity, like climbing, throwing spears, or jumping about, results in getting tired. You'll have a harder time doing anything unless you stop moving for a second to catch your breath. Speaking of the hunger bar, it has this interesting meter above it where it shows various foods you've eaten. Sometimes it also blinks icons of foods you haven't, so I think it's meant to track nearby food, but I'm honestly not 100% sure yet. Something exciting to figure out. I think that's everything I can show here, so let's move on to the next new Slugcat. Now I will warn you that these sections are about to get much shorter, and the reason for that is mostly because the Gourmand is the most mechanically complex in a way I can show you without spoilers. Now don't get me wrong, they're all pretty complex, but most of that complexity comes from how they operate within their individual campaigns. On to the Artificer. I have a tendency to be a bit of a contrarian, though not on purpose. When I saw the hype surrounding this Slugcat, I thought it was being blown out of proportion. Pun intended. Oh, how wrong I was. In fact, it may be one of my favorites. The Artificer is rather simple. Here you have a carnivorous outlaw, much like our old friend the Hunter, who has some karma issues. We'll get into that when we address the campaign, as it's a big component of how you'll be playing this Slugcat. But in the base game's campaigns, you'll most likely be doing the following. Turning spears into explosive spears and rocks into bombs, both of which consume a food pip to do, and rocketing around the map like a nitro-powered lemur, which has a 50-50 chance of boosting you either directly into or out of a hungry mouth. The Artificer's main weakness is water. Submerge for even a couple seconds and you'll detonate. This also happens if you manage to boost yourself too many times, though I think you'd have to be playing pretty recklessly to do that on accident, as it knocks you out several times first. The Artificer is fierce, and I'm excited to show you the campaign, but first we have to check out the Rivulet. This is the one I was most excited for, and it does not disappoint. The Rivulet is pretty standard order, all things considered, just better. It's another case of the specialized campaign dictating the playstyle, not the other way around. The Rivulet is significantly faster than any of the other Slugcats and can cross massive gaps with its regular jumps and pounces. This mobility isn't just lateral, it's also vertical. The backflip reaches insanely high. The main thing you probably noticed, though, is the oxalotl-like gills. The Rivulet is an absolute beast in the water and can hold its breath for around 40 seconds. I don't have a lot of water here in the outskirts to show you, so you'll have to take my word for it. Compared to the couple seconds anyone else can, this opens up a whole new series of gameplay options in certain regions. Lastly, the Rivulet may work fast, but so does its metabolism. It doesn't need much food to hibernate, but it also can't store very much. You're going to be searching for food constantly, but it ought to be easier to find with that intense speed. Next on the list is the Spearmaster. As I said, these descriptions are going to become shorter and shorter. The Spearmaster is likely the most dangerous Slugcat out of the new additions. Within my first 10 minutes, I pinned 2 lizards to walls, one so hard that a king vulture wasn't able to remove it. Where'd I get all the spears? They're spines, grown by the Spearmaster, and they're free. I was under the impression they would cost food to produce and was very surprised to realize they don't, so what's the trade-off? Well, the Spearmaster can't eat at all. This has the added complication of preventing you from storing any items in your stomach, too. Instead, the Spearmaster is like a vampire, filling its belly from the spines it plunges into other creatures, and the length of time those spines stay in affects how much sustenance you get. As far as I'm aware, that completely covers the Spearmaster. Play this Slugcat if you want to be the Predator. Lastly, and almost perfectly opposite from the Spearmaster, we have the Saint. The Saint is a vegetarian, unable to even eat bat flies. It's also a pacifist. Try to throw a spear and it'll clatter to the ground, so what gives? Instead of combat, the Saint demands that you focus on stealth and mobility. There isn't much to say about this Slugcat other than the fact it has a grappling tongue. There doesn't have to be much to say though, because this mechanic alone is really deep. You can grapple surfaces, certain items, even enemies. You also get a boost after doing this, allowing you to easily climb walls. My first time playing the Saint, another one I was particularly excited for, I was a bit put off. Controlling it felt a bit unnatural. I think it has something to do with the rotation of the body as you use the tongue. That said, after spending an afternoon with it, I really like it. In fact, there isn't one new addition I dislike. Now I know you're probably excited to talk about the campaigns, but before I go showing you the first area of each, and there's your spoiler warning, let's talk about co-op. How does it function? Well, it's finally time we went back to the co-op menu. At the top we have our slider that lets us select how many players there are. Clicking above each portrait will let you change that player's name, while clicking below will let you select which Slugcat they are, from the unlocked options of course. Down here we have some straightforward options. We're going to go over those first. Color mode just lets you choose between default colors, auto coloring, and custom colors, which adds a new option below the portrait that functions the same as the other coloring menu. Camera input is mostly an accessibility option. It's how quickly you have to double tap the camera change button to switch who it's targeting. Difficulty is a big one, and I think the diversity here is pretty cool. On easy, only one person needs to get to the shelter. On normal, everyone has to, so if your friend dies, you have to rescue them and take them back with you. And on hard, if anyone dies, it's game over. And then the icons over here on the bottom right are more specific toggles. Friendly lizards can be toggled on or off, making tamed lizards friendly or hostile toward whoever didn't tame them. Not sure why this is an option, because it just sounds inconvenient to me. But I'm a more options the better kind of guy, so I'm glad it's here. Leave me a comment if you can think of a reason you'd turn this on. Toggling the HUD will hide player names and other indicators. Spear's miss here is basically spear-friendly fire. I think this is a fun one from time to time. Leads to some funny situations for sure. Worth noting, this is independent of being able to hit each other with rocks. This is strictly spears. You can always hit each other with rocks. Friendly stealing here lets you toggle grabbing items from each other's hands. Smart shortcuts here is great. I was a bit skeptical of it at first because I wasn't sure how it would work exactly, but basically when you go through a screen transition, it locks you into the shortcut for a few seconds until the other player arrives. If they don't arrive for long enough, you'll continue through anyway, and obviously it doesn't slow you down if you're the last living player. And then lastly here, we have camera cycles. I prefer playing with camera cycles on. This is how it used to work on the mod version. What this does is let any player switch the camera between each other. Let me give you an example of why I prefer this. The camera is on me and I end up on a different screen than my wife. Maybe she falls off a pole and now she's face to face with a lizard. She's panicking. She doesn't have time to flip the camera. Having this set to camera cycles lets me switch it back for her, where otherwise it'd be strictly up to her to switch it. I'll talk briefly about my co-op experience with my wife while I share some footage of us playing. The co-op multiplayer is just one of those things, man. I love it, it's a blast, but it's important to make the distinction that it's specifically cooperative multiplayer. Split screen doesn't exist here, so you're always going to be running off the same screen, or leaving someone totally blind somewhere. It just comes down to how it's designed. A lot of the fun comes specifically from the chaos. At one point, my wife was playing the Gourmand and I was playing the Spearmaster. I died with no enemies on the screen. Why? She rolled into me, crushing me. It got a huge laugh out of us. The game is absolutely at its best when this chaos is in play. Creatively combining abilities to solve problems only for it to go horribly awry, the burst of adrenaline chasing something down because your friend is in its maw but not dead, clumsily knocking each other off of ledges into bottomless pits. I could go on, but you get it, and it's a very specific kind of multiplayer available here. If this sounds like it's for you, then great, you'll have a blast just like we did. If it doesn't, trust me when I say there's so much other content to enjoy here that you won't feel like you're missing out. I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on how this game performs because realistically it's about 6 years old, and this is a review of the DLC, not the base game, but it runs fine. I'm also not usually recording live action, so bear with me on the quality here. I've done my best to color correct this to be as accurate to my experience as possible, but keep in mind you're viewing this at an angle and not head-on, so there's a bit of screen glare. It seems to run the same as it did before the DLC. All my footage has been on high with a screen recorder running to boot. Sometimes I leave Firefox open with like 4 tabs. At most, you get some stuttering when you load into a new area, and it does that letterboxing with the title of the region. I'm not going to count the gate transitions, as those have always caused massive frame drops. They're loading zones, that's why they exist. I did have a little stuttering around an area that had just way too many scavengers, but that's always been an issue this game has had. It doesn't bother me, though if you're particularly picky, it may be something you notice. While I've been recording it on PC, I've been enjoying it almost exclusively on my Steam Deck. Everything I have to say is the same. Running uncapped on high. You're watching it run with the highest settings and brightness right now, again at an angle. It may be a bit small for the Steam Deck, depending on the distance you're playing at, but it works great docked on a television with 2 Xbox controllers. This brings me to my only 2 issues on deck, and it's worth mentioning them. Now, if you're playing it on deck for the first time, you'll have to play around with resolution and windowed mode to get the graphics properly lined up. It's just an issue with this type of graphical style, I think, and once you do, it's fine. The main issue comes down to controls. I'm not sure why, but my wife and I are able to play with 2 controllers just fine. Then, I try to play with 1 controller by myself, and I have to rebind all the buttons to keyboard keys because trying to load into the campaigns freezes the game. This took me a lot of troubleshooting, and I don't know what it is, but I'm hoping it's just a bug that'll be ironed out by the time it matters. In the meantime, it has a solution, it's just a bit tedious rebinding back and forth. The second is that there's no cloud save support. Not a huge deal, so just a bit more tedium is all. They've moved the location for saves, so if you're on Windows, it's going to be under App Data, Local Low, Video Cult. And if you're on deck, it should be around Steam, Steam Apps, Compat Data, 312520, that's Rain World's app number, PFX, Drive C, User, Steam User, App Data, Local Low, Video Cult. That should cover this section, and if those are my biggest gripes, I'd say that's pretty good. Alright, we're about to get into the second heaviest spoilers here. I'm going to talk about new mechanics that make these campaigns unique, where they fall in the timeline, and show you the starting regions for each. I'm probably going to be rather indiscriminate with the footage I show, and move from one campaign to the other pretty quickly, so if you don't want to see this stuff yet, now's the time to click off. We'll start with the Gourmand. Honestly, didn't really notice anything unique so far in terms of mechanics. I think this is the closest in the timeline to the others as well, because everything here is pretty similar to the Survivor or Hunter run. I think I've seen some tougher enemies, so I'd guess Hunter. That's pretty much it for the Gourmand so far, but I think that's to be expected, because the Gourmand is so mechanically diverse. Let me know if you stumble across something cool I missed. The Artificer is a whole different beast though. This campaign plays almost like a different game. You start in the garbage wastes, but I believe we're earlier in the timeline, as Shoreline is, well, let's call it inaccessible from here. There are still buildings standing and a lot of dangerous acid inside. Really awesome new zone and very hostile, full of high tier enemies like cyan lizards. I even saw a red one. It's a blast knocking cyans into the acid. Your max karma is capped at 1, at least from the outset, so you can't gain any from resting. How do you get through karma gates then? Like a bounty hunter. Scavengers despise you, and each one is worth a certain karma level. Carrying a dead one with you boosts your level, allowing you to pass through. You can't rely on the same body either, as resting will lower that value by 1 each cycle. If you recall, the more Slugcats accessibility menu I didn't show, I believe this was one of the options you could turn on. I'm very excited to explore further out from here, but this new zone is a great starting place. Fast forward to the end of the timeline and we end up with the rivulet in the overgrown drainage system. This place is really cool, especially because of the rivulet's unique mechanic. Sometimes, when you rest, you'll wake up in the middle of a cycle with the rain pouring down, flooding everything. The hibernation chamber will become unusable, sometimes even fully flooded, and you'll have to manage your way to another, usually through a lot of water, picking up enough food along the way. We also see some new enemies here, really fierce water lizards. Well, snakes, eels maybe? Either way, they're really fast, and they're surprisingly dangerous on land too. I think this campaign is a great way to set the rivulet apart and really complements its more standard moveset. Cycles are short and anxiety-inducing, and the room's filling with water as you try to get to the next shelter really gets your heart pumping. Now, the Spearmaster is, I believe, the earliest in the timeline. We start in a strange, vaguely iterator interior, and we make our way out to the outskirts. I know I said first zone only, but the mechanical interior is like one room. This is interesting. I'm excited to see where it goes, but I don't think there are any unique mechanics to this campaign. I suspect most of the good stuff is timeline-based, and thus further in, unique areas with new things to do. Lastly, we have the Saint, the latest timeline. No more rain, only snow. There's no timer on this one really, not in the same way. Instead, as the world gets colder and the blizzard worsens, which seems to be pretty random, you start to get cold. Everything starts to get cold. You'll see other creatures running for hibernation chambers, just like when it rains, and if you don't get inside one in time, you'll freeze. They also start to slow down themselves. I'm not entirely sure how the temperature system works exactly. For example, being inside seems to decrease your temperature more slowly than if you're directly in the blizzard. It makes sense. Lanterns don't seem to make a difference, but cherry bomb plants do, actually increasing your temperature. This is another one that'll be fun to experiment with, figuring out exactly what raises your temperature. The Saint is also capped at 2 karma starting out, and the path of progression points toward the echoes. Well, I think that's everything, so before I get to the end here, I'd like to address something, and then give you my opinion on the DLC as a package. There was a recent announcement that the base game will be going from $20 to $25 in February. Based on the amount of content coming in just the base update without the DLC, I think this is totally reasonable. Buddy, the community manager at Acapara Games, has stated, and I quote, "We're changing the development direction of Rain World. The original price reflected a finished game, whereas the new price reflects that we want to develop more for Rain World," among several other reasons for this price change. This is encouraging because it sounds to me like things aren't finished here, and if that's the case, I look forward to whatever the future could hold for Rain World, especially with the quality of this DLC. But he also stated that the sale price will be unchanged, so if you can't quite swing the $5 difference and you can't pick it up now for $20, don't fret. At the bottom of the post, there's even mention that a discount will be coming before the price increase, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Look, I think my opinion is pretty clear by now, but this DLC is great. I've spent probably 30 odd hours with it. It's 3 AM the night before this video goes up, and I'm still finding stuff to add to the video. And I'm only almost done with one campaign, the Artificer. This isn't even touching on the new challenge modes, collecting all the lore, the expeditions. It's mind-blowing how much they've added, and I want to thank Acapara once again for giving me the opportunity to play it early for you and tell you what I think. And that's that I think at minimum, you're tripling the game's base content, maybe quadrupling, minimum. As promised, I do have some heavy spoilers for you all, just a couple little snippets of new zones or changes to old ones. More of a teaser really, because I'd like you to experience this all yourself. If you do want to see more though, feel free to subscribe to my channel and toss me a like, it really helps me out. I'll be doing some live streaming and posting tons of new Downpour content. As always, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you next time. Check it out. This was a big reveal for me the first time I saw it. It's really cool. It really shows you, like, what's happened in this world. We made it, boys!